The black stallion had been causing trouble at Sunrise Ranch for 6 weeks. But when 10-year-old Luke Miller arrived at the ranch that Tuesday afternoon, he said he could calm the wild horse that had sent 3 professional wranglers to the hospital. Ranch owner Tom Walker watched from his porch as the small boy walked toward the fence, where his prized quarter horses were huddled together, scared. The wild mustang stood alone in the far pasture. His black coat shone in the desert sun, and his muscles moved like a caged panther as he paced back and forth. No human had gotten within 50 feet of the stallion without being chased. If you're enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more amazing horse stories like this one. Now, let's see what happens when a boy's mysterious past meets a horse's wild spirit. Luke had arrived at the ranch that morning with his elderly guardian, Mrs. Green. She had answered Tom's ad for a housekeeper. The boy was quiet, polite, and seemed to understand animals in a way Tom couldn't explain. "Son," Tom called out, holding the porch railing with his weathered hands. "You need to stay away from that fence. That stallion is dangerous." Luke turned around. His dark eyes looked serious for his age. "He's not dangerous, Mr. Walker. He's protecting something." These words sent a chill down Tom's spine. Protecting what? His family? Or the memory of them? Tom studied the boy more carefully. There was something familiar about Luke's face, something that made Tom think of the past. The child had the lean body of a natural rider and carried himself with quiet confidence that reminded Tom of someone from long ago. "How do you know that?" Tom asked, stepping down from the porch. "Because that's what I would do if someone took me away from everything I loved." The honesty in the boy's voice surprised Tom. Mrs. Green had mentioned that Luke was an orphan, but she hadn't given details. Looking at the child now, Tom saw strength that spoke of hard experiences number 10-year-old should face. "Look," Tom said gently, "that stallion showed up on my land 3 weeks ago. He's been attacking my livestock and destroying fences. I called animal control, but they can't get near him either." "You called animal control?" Luke's voice sounded worried. "I have to protect my other animals and my ranch hands." Luke looked back at the stallion, who had stopped pacing and was now staring right at them. "What will they do to him?" Tom hesitated. The truth was harsh, but the boy deserved to hear it. "If they can't move him, they'll have to put him down." Pain flashed across Luke's face, making Tom's chest feel tight. Without saying another word, the boy walked closer to the fence, ignoring Tom's sharp warning to stay back. The stallion lifted his head. His ears pricked forward with interest, not anger. As Luke got closer, the magnificent horse moved toward the fence with smooth grace, stopping just out of arm's reach. "Hello, beautiful," Luke whispered, his voice barely carrying on the desert breeze. "I know you're scared. I know what it's like to lose everything." Tom watched in amazement as the stallion took another step closer. His nostrils flared as he sniffed the air around Luke. The horse's angry posture had completely disappeared, replaced by careful curiosity. "Mrs. Green," Tom called to the elderly woman who had come out of the ranch house. "How long has Luke been with you?" "Only 6 months," she replied, wrapping her shawl tighter against the evening breeze. "The poor child has been through so much." "What happened to his family?" Mrs. Green's face looked sad. "A car accident last year. Both parents died instantly. Luke spent months in the hospital with injuries. When he got better, there was no one else to take him." Tom felt sorry for the boy. No wonder Luke understood loss so deeply. "And before that, where did he live?" "Northern Nevada, I think. His father worked with wild horses." Those words hit Tom like lightning. Northern Nevada. Wild horses. A memory came back from 15 years ago. A young man named Mike Carter, who had worked briefly at the ranch, specializing in taming mustangs. Mike had been passionate about saving wild horses and had left to start his own sanctuary. "Mrs. Green," Tom said carefully, "was Luke's father named Mike?" She nodded. "Mike Carter. Did you know him?" Tom's legs almost gave out. He grabbed the fence post to stay standing as the truth hit him. "Yes," he whispered. "I knew Mike." That evening, after Luke had reluctantly left the stallion and gone inside for dinner, Tom sat alone on his porch, thinking about memories he'd tried to forget for over 10 years. Mike Carter had worked at Sunrise Ranch during one of the hardest times in Tom's life. Tom's daughter, Sarah, had been 16 then, rebellious, angry at the world, and furious with her father for moving the family from the city to the remote ranch after her mother died. Mike, only 22 at the time, had been hired to help with a herd of rescued mustangs that the government had placed on the ranch. Sarah had been instantly drawn to Mike's gentle way with the horses and his exciting stories about wild mustang herds running free across Nevada. Tom had watched his daughter come alive around Mike in a way she hadn't since her mother's death, but Tom had also seen something else starting between the young horse trainer and his teenage daughter, something that scared him as a protective father. When Tom discovered Sarah sneaking out to meet Mike in the evenings, he'd exploded with rage and fear. The argument had been ugly. Tom accused Mike of taking advantage of Sarah, threatened to have him arrested, and fired him on the spot. Mike had tried to explain that he cared for Sarah and would never hurt her, but Tom wouldn't listen. He'd driven the young man away that very night. Sarah had been devastated. She'd screamed that Tom had ruined her life, that Mike was the only person who understood her. 3 days later, she'd run away, leaving only a note saying she was going to find Mike and that Tom would never see her again. That had been 15 years ago. Despite hiring private investigators and spending thousands of dollars searching, Tom had never found his daughter. Mike Carter had seemed to disappear too, and with him, any hope of finding Sarah. Now, sitting in the dark, Tom wondered if Luke might hold the key to finding his long-lost daughter. If Mike had really been the boy's father, then maybe Sarah had been in Luke's life too. The possibility filled Tom with both hope and fear. The next morning, Tom was woken up by noise in the yard. Through his bedroom window, he saw his ranch hands gathered around the pasture fence, pointing and talking excitedly. He dressed quickly and hurried outside to find Luke already at the fence with the black stallion standing calmly just a few feet away. "How long has he been there?" Tom asked his foreman, Ben Rogers. "About an hour," Ben replied, shaking his head in amazement. "The kid just walked out here, and that devil horse came right up to the fence like a trained dog." Tom watched as Luke spoke softly to the stallion, his small hands moving in gentle gestures. The horse's ears swiveled constantly, listening to every word and movement with focused attention. "Luke," Tom said carefully, approaching the fence. "Can I ask you something?" The boy looked over his shoulder. "Yes, sir." "Did your father ever tell you about working at a ranch in Arizona? About a place called Sunrise?" Luke's eyes widened with surprise. "You know my father?" "I did. He worked here for several months about 15 years ago. He used to tell me stories about this place," Luke said excitedly. "About the mustangs he helped train and about—" He stopped suddenly, looking unsure. "About what?" Luke looked away. "About a girl he met here. Someone named Sarah." Tom's heart pounded. What did he tell you about Sarah? That she was the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen, that she understood horses the way he did, that he loved her, but had to leave because her father was angry. The words hit Tom like physical blows. Did he ever see her again? Luke nodded slowly. She found him in Nevada. They got married when she turned 18. The world seemed to tilt around Tom. Married? Sarah was my daughter. Tom's legs gave out completely. He sat down hard in the dirt, staring at Luke with new understanding. This wasn't just Mike Carter's son. This was his grandson, Sarah's child. "Are you okay, Mr. Walker?" Luke asked, concern in his young voice. Tom struggled to find words. 15 years of searching. 15 years of wondering if my daughter was alive, and she's been living in Nevada, married to Mike, raising a son who's now standing right in front of me. "Luke," he managed to whisper, "Sarah was my daughter. You're my grandson." The boy's eyes went wide. But Mom never talked about her family. She said she didn't have any family except Dad and me. The pain in those words cut deep. Sarah had chosen to cut all ties with her past, even denying Luke the knowledge of his grandfather. Tom understood why. He'd driven her away with his anger and stubbornness, making her feel like she had no choice but to disappear completely. Mrs. Green had come over during their conversation and now stood listening with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Luke," she said softly, "this explains so much." "What do you mean?" Tom asked. "The boy has had nightmares since the accident, not just about losing his parents, but about a ranch with horses. He kept saying he had to get back to the horses, that someone was waiting for him. The counselors thought it was trauma-induced fantasy." Tom looked at Luke, who was staring at him with a mix of wonder and uncertainty. "You remember this place?" "I've been dreaming about it," Luke admitted. "But I thought they were just dreams. Mom and Dad used to bring me here when I was little, didn't they?" Tom's throat tightened. "I don't know. I never saw you." The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah and Mike had brought their son to the ranch, but had stayed hidden, perhaps watching from a distance, but never making contact. The thought of his daughter being so close, without him knowing, was almost too much to bear. A sudden whinny from the stallion broke the emotional tension. The horse was pacing again, but this time his movements seemed worried rather than angry. "Something's wrong," Luke said, turning his attention back to the horse. "He's trying to tell us something." As if answering the boy, the stallion moved to the gate of his enclosure and began pawing at the ground, his dark eyes fixed on the distant hills that bordered the ranch. "I think he wants to go somewhere," Luke said. Tom studied the horse's behavior, recognizing the signs of an animal trying to communicate an urgent need. "Ben," he called to his foreman, "get my ATV ready." "Boss, you're not seriously thinking of following that horse? That thing's dangerous." "That's exactly what I'm thinking, and I'm taking Luke with me." Mrs. Green looked alarmed. "Mr. Walker, I don't think." "This horse showed up on my ranch for a reason," Tom interrupted, "and Luke is the only one who can talk to him. If that stallion wants to show us something, we need to follow." 20 minutes later, Tom and Luke rode slowly across the desert on the ATV, following the black stallion. The horse moved ahead of them with determined steps. He would stop and look back to make sure they were still following before continuing toward the rocky hills that marked the northern edge of the ranch. "Grandpa," Luke said, the word sounding strange and wonderful on his young lips. "Can I ask you something?" Tom's chest tightened at being called Grandpa for the first time. "Anything. Why did Mom leave?" "Dad always said it wasn't her fault, but he never told me what really happened." Tom struggled with how much truth a 10-year-old could handle. "I made a terrible mistake, Luke. I was scared of losing your mother, and my fear made me angry. I said things and did things that hurt both your parents very badly." "What kind of things?" "I thought your father wasn't good enough for your mother. I was wrong, but I couldn't see it then. I drove them away because I was too proud and too scared to trust that your father truly loved her." Luke was quiet for several minutes as they bumped across the rough terrain. "Dad used to say that fear makes people do stupid things. Your father was a very wise man. Do you think Mom would have forgiven you if she'd lived?" The question pierced Tom's heart. "I hope so. I've spent every day of the last 15 years hoping I'd get the chance to find out." They kept following the stallion deeper into the hills along paths Tom hadn't traveled in years. The horse seemed to know exactly where he was going, moving with the confidence of an animal on familiar ground. After nearly an hour of riding, the stallion stopped at the entrance to a narrow canyon that Tom recognized with a start. It was Devil's Canyon, a place he'd avoided for years because of its dangerous terrain and hidden drop-offs. Why would he bring us here? Tom muttered. Luke climbed off the ATV and approached the stallion, who stood perfectly still as the boy came near. For the first time, Luke reached out and touched the horse's neck, running his small hand along the powerful muscles beneath the black coat. "He's not just showing us the way," Luke said quietly. "He's taking us home." Home. Luke looked up at Tom with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than his 10 years. "This is where Mom and Dad brought me. I remember now. There's a hidden valley in this canyon where wild horses come to foal. Dad was documenting their behavior for his research." Tom's breath caught. A hidden valley meant water and shelter, exactly the kind of place Mike would have chosen for a secret family retreat. "Luke, are you sure?" The boy nodded, his hands still resting on the stallion's neck. "The last time we came here, I was about 7. Mom made Dad promise it would be our special secret place. She said, someday when I'm older, I might be ready to share it with someone else." The implications hit Tom like an avalanche. Sarah had kept this connection to the ranch, to the land where she'd grown up, even after cutting ties with her father. She'd been planning to eventually bridge the gap between her two worlds, her childhood home and the family she'd built with Mike. The stallion began moving again, leading them deeper into the canyon along a path so narrow that Tom had to leave the ATV behind. They walked single file, with Luke staying close to the horse and Tom following behind, amazed at how the wild stallion had become as gentle as a riding school pony around the boy. The canyon walls rose higher around them, blocking most of the afternoon sun and creating a feeling of entering a sacred space. Tom could hear the sound of running water ahead, and his amazement grew as they rounded a bend and emerged into a hidden valley that took his breath away. The valley was about 2 acres in size, surrounded by sheer rock walls, but filled with lush grass and fed by a natural spring that bubbled up from the rocks to form a clear stream. Ancient cottonwood trees provided shade, and wildflowers bloomed everywhere along the water's edge. But it wasn't the natural beauty that made Tom's knees go weak. It was the sight of a small cabin tucked beneath the largest cottonwood tree, with a corral built nearby, clear signs of recent habitation. "Mom and Dad built that," Luke said softly. "We used to come here every summer." Tom approached the cabin with shaking steps, noticing the careful craftsmanship and the love that had clearly gone into its construction. Through the windows, he could see simple furniture, books, and personal belongings that told the story of a family's secret retreat. On the small porch, a wooden sign hung by the door. Tom read the words aloud: "The Carter Family Sanctuary, a place where wild hearts run free." "There's something else," Luke said, leading Tom around to the back of the cabin. Behind the structure, in a grove of aspens, were 3 wooden crosses marking graves. 2 were larger, bearing the names Mike Carter and Sarah Walker Carter, along with dates from the previous year. The 3rd, smaller cross was unmarked, but clearly prepared for a future occupant. Tom sank to his knees beside his daughter's grave. 15 years of grief and regret crashed over him like a dam breaking. Sarah had taken Mike's name, but had also kept Walker, perhaps holding on to some connection to her family, despite their estrangement. "They died in Nevada," Luke said quietly, sitting beside his grandfather. "But Dad always said they wanted to be buried here if anything happened, in the place where they fell in love. How did their bodies get here?" Tom asked through his tears. "Mrs. Green helped me. She knew about this place, because Mom had written about it in letters. After the funeral in Nevada, we brought them here secretly. Mrs. Green said it's what they would have wanted, Tom looked at his grandson with new admiration. At just 10 years old, Luke had fulfilled his parents' final wishes and returned them to their sacred place. The boy's maturity and strength were unbelievable. "The third grave?" Tom asked. Luke's expression turned sad. Dad always said this place was meant for 3 generations. He hoped that someday, if you ever forgave him, you might want to rest here too. The generosity of Mike's spirit, even after the way Tom had treated him, was almost too much to bear. "Luke, I need you to know something. Your father was a good man, better than I was. I was wrong about everything." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sound of running water and the wind in the aspens. The black stallion had moved to the stream to drink, and Tom watched as several wild horses appeared from the far end of the valley. Mares with foals and a few younger stallions approached the black horse with obvious respect. "He's their lead stallion," Luke explained. "This is his herd. When the government started another roundup last month, he led them here to safety. But he knew they needed help." "Help? The spring is running low because of the drought. They need access to the stream on your ranch, but they were afraid to leave the valley because of the helicopters and capture teams." Tom understood now. The stallion hadn't been attacking his ranch. He'd been testing the boundaries, trying to figure out if it was safe to bring his herd down for water. When traditional methods failed, he'd somehow known to wait for Luke, the one human who could bridge the gap between wild and domestic, between past and present. "What do you think we should do?" Tom asked his grandson. Luke stood and walked to the stallion, who lowered his magnificent head to the boy's level. They seemed to communicate without words, and Tom watched in wonder as his grandson showed the same gift with horses that his father had possessed. "He wants to know if his family will be safe on your ranch," Luke said finally. "If you'll protect them from the government helicopters and give them access to water." Tom thought about his sprawling ranch, the thousands of acres that could easily support a small herd of wild horses. He thought about his daughter, who had loved these creatures with the same passion as her husband. Most of all, he thought about the grandson he'd just discovered, who clearly had inherited that same deep connection to wild horses. "Tell him yes," Tom said. "Tell him the ranch will always be a sanctuary for his herd. And tell him Luke will be here to help care for them." Luke's face lit up with joy as he turned back to the stallion, speaking in soft tones that carried across the valley. The horse's response was immediate, a loud, trumpeting call that was answered by the entire herd. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, Tom and Luke made their way back toward the ranch, accompanied by the stallion and his family. The horses moved with quiet confidence now, no longer fearful, but trusting in the promise of sanctuary. "Grandpa," Luke said as they walked, "Mrs. Green has been looking for a permanent home for me. She's getting too old to care for a child full-time." Tom's heart leaped. "Would you like to stay here at the ranch?" Could I help take care of the horses and learn about ranching?" "Luke, this ranch has been in our family for 4 generations. Someday, if you want it, it'll be yours. But more than that, I need you here. I've spent 15 years without family, and I don't want to waste another day." They spent the evening planning how to integrate the wild herd into ranch life, discussing the construction of larger pastures and additional water sources. Mrs. Green, delighted that Luke had found his family, agreed to stay on as housekeeper and surrogate grandmother, completing the circle of care around the boy. Over the following weeks, the transformation of Sunrise Ranch was amazing. The wild horses thrived in their new home, and Luke proved to be a natural horseman with an intuitive understanding of horse behavior that amazed even veteran ranch hands. The black stallion, whom Luke named Shadow for his midnight coat, became the boy's constant companion and helped train other horses on the ranch. Together, They developed a program for gentling wild mustangs that attracted attention from horse trainers across the country. 3 months after Luke's arrival, Tom stood on his porch watching his grandson work with a young mustang named Philly in the training corral. The boy's patience and skill were clear as he slowly built trust with the frightened animal, using techniques that combined his father's methods with ideas entirely his own. "He's special," Mrs. Green said, joining Tom on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. "Just like his parents," Tom replied. "I see both Mike and Sarah in him every day. Do you think he'll stay when he grows up? Or will he want to explore the world beyond the ranch?" Tom thought about the question. "I think Luke will always be drawn to wild places and wild horses. But this ranch is his heritage. It's where his story began, even if he didn't know it at first. No matter where life takes him, he'll always come home to Sunrise." That evening, as they did every night, Tom and Luke visited the hidden valley to check on the wild herd and spend time at Sarah and Mike's graves. Luke had started bringing wildflowers to place on the graves. That night, he'd picked a particularly beautiful bouquet of desert lupins. "Mom always loved purple flowers," he said, arranging them carefully. "So did your grandmother. My wife Helen. Sarah inherited that from her." Luke looked up with interest. "Tell me about Grandma Helen." Tom sat down beside the graves, grateful for the chance to share family history with his grandson. "She was a lot like your mother, strong-willed, passionate about horses, and never afraid to speak her mind. She would have loved you tremendously. Do you think Mom and Dad are happy that they're together wherever they are?" Tom looked at the peaceful valley, at the wild horses grazing contentedly by the stream, at his grandson's earnest face in the twilight. "I think they're at peace, Luke, and I think they're proud of what you've accomplished here." As they prepared to leave the valley, Shadow approached Luke for their nightly farewell ritual. The stallion would lower his head, and Luke would whisper something in his ear, a private conversation between boy and horse that never failed to move Tom. "What do you tell him?" Tom asked as they walked back through the canyon. "I tell him about my day, about the things I learned, about my plans for tomorrow. And I thank him for bringing me home." "He brought you home?" Luke nodded seriously. "Shadow knew exactly where to find me, Grandpa. Mrs. Green said he appeared at our house in Nevada the day after the accident. Like, he was waiting for me to be ready to come back here. I think Mom and Dad sent him to guide me home when I needed family the most." Tom felt chills run down his spine. The idea that his daughter and Mike might have somehow arranged Luke's return to the ranch seemed impossible. Yet the sequence of events had been too perfect to be coincidence. That night, Tom sat at his desk writing letters to local officials about legal protection for the wild herd, to horse rescue organizations about expanding the ranch's sanctuary program, and to his lawyer about updating his will to secure Luke's inheritance. He also wrote a letter he'd been meaning to write for 15 years, a letter to Sarah and Mike, expressing his regret, his love, and his gratitude for the incredible gift of their son. He sealed it in an envelope addressed simply to my daughter and the man she loved and placed it in his desk drawer, planning to read it aloud at their graves the next day. A year later, Sunrise Ranch had become famous as a top wild horse sanctuary and training facility. Luke, now 11, had been featured in horse magazines and documentaries for his amazing ability to communicate with wild mustangs. He'd also started a blog called Shadow Stories, sharing tales of ranch life and wild horse conservation that had attracted thousands of followers. The ranch hosted school groups, university researchers, and horse enthusiasts from around the world. Luke had become a confident spokesperson for wild horse protection, speaking with a maturity and passion that reminded everyone of his parents' legacy. On the anniversary of his parents' deaths, Luke stood beside their graves with Tom, Mrs. Green, and several ranch hands who had become like family. He read a letter he'd written to his parents, telling them about his life at the ranch, his growing skills with horses, and the grandfather who loved him unconditionally. "I want them to know that I'm happy," Luke said as he finished reading. "That I'm exactly where I belong." Shadow stood nearby, as if understanding the importance of the moment. The stallion had become a legend in his own right, leading his herd to safety and serving as the foundation sire for a new generation of ranch horses that combined wild spirit with gentle temperament. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Shadow hadn't appeared that day? Tom asked as they walked back to the ranch house. Luke thought seriously. "I think he would have found another way to bring me here. Some things are just meant to be, Grandpa. Mom used to say that love always finds a way, even when it seems impossible." As the sun set over Sunrise Ranch, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Tom reflected on the truth of those words. Love had indeed found a way, through a wild stallion's journey, through a boy's courage, and through the healing power of second chances. The ranch that had once been a place of loss and regret had become a sanctuary for both wild horses and wounded hearts. Luke had brought healing not just to Shadow's herd, but to his grandfather's spirit too, proving that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places. We hope this story of Luke, Shadow, and the healing power of family has touched your heart the way it touched ours. If you believe in second chances and the magic of wild horses, please share this video with friends who need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of horses and the humans whose lives they transform. What's your favorite moment from Luke and Shadow's journey? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from our amazing community of horse lovers.